I am excited for today's webinar. In fact, we had a record number of signups today. So obviously, mastering tough conversations is something that we all need to talk about. We all need some help with. And I hope that some of the strategies and some of the things that we've developed and that we've really figured out from some of the top leaders, some of the best books, some of the best psychologists, and therapists, and all the amazing people that I've been able to meet in my life over my career have really helped me figure out some of these things, and they have been tried and tested over and over and over again. And I'm just thrilled to be able to give you some of those strategies today. As Daniel mentioned, I'm really proud of People G2 is now an AccuSource company. This is why we're sort of doing this joint webinar together, because we are now two peas in a pod, and we are really excited about that and continuing the success that the organization has in being able to be a top performer. And want to thank both organizations for being the sponsors of today's webinar and really bringing this great content to you for free. As we said, we will send out a copy of this and certainly a copy of the deck as well if you're interested. Now, the first thing I want to do to kind of get us going is a little pop quiz. And I would love for you all, if you could find that chat button over inside of this little system here. Love to see what you think. If the man in yellow is talking to the man in red, who is responsible for the meaning of what is being said? So who is responsible for what the man in yellow is saying? Whatever the meaning is of whatever he's saying, who do you think is responsible? Who does that sort of rely on? Where does that responsibility lie? I don't know if you guys have found the chat yet, or if I haven't found it. But certainly, if while you're in there, I'd love for you to say if you think it's yellow or if you think it's red, and to know what you think. And the answer may surprise you. The answer is actually the man in red, because the man in yellow, when he's talking, the person listening is the one who is interpreting what is being said, possibly placing biases and preconceived notions and cognitive biases on top of whatever's going on. So if you are the one listening, it is actually your job, it is your responsibility to understand the meaning of whatever is being said. That's a pretty big responsibility, and maybe a little surprising. But ultimately, that person in yellow, and whatever they're saying, they may not be saying it correctly. They may not be saying it exactly how you need to hear it, but it is your job, if you're the listener, to make sure you understand what is being said. You are responsible for the meaning of another person talking. And that, the first time I heard that, I said, that's malarkey. That's just ridiculous. But the more I thought about it, the more I began to practice it, I realized it was true. And when I went back to whoever I was talking to make sure I really understood what they were saying, and I really could paraphrase it back to them, I could summarize it back to them, and if I got it right, that often eliminated so many problems and so many difficult conversations going forward. So we're going to really phrase today's webinar of tough conversations around difficult people. I find that most difficult conversations and tough conversations have a person in our lives or a person in this situation that we maybe find difficult. And so these are sort of all different types of people. We have the bully, we have the narcissist, the manipulator, the slacker, the blamer, the control freak, the victim, the passive aggressive, right? I'm sure maybe you guys are imagining some people as I'm saying these, right? We have the baby, the know-it-all, the overbearing, and there's a lot more, right? But we have these people in our lives, whether they're our employees or our bosses, there are the teachers, the whoever it is in your life that you may feel like you is one of these personality types. And so we're going to walk through some of the strategies on how to really help this be a bit better. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, the first strategy that we really need to start with, is what is the story you're telling yourself? This is the most important part of having a difficult conversation. It starts with you. Have you already told yourself that this conversation is going to be hard? Have you already assumed that they're going to yell? Have you already, decided to have fear and anxiety and worry about whatever's going to happen before it's even happened? Because often we sort of manifest this bad outcome by thinking all these things are going to happen and preparing for them. And we almost sort of create that situation that drives that other person to maybe be their worst. By eliminating the sort of thoughts and going into the conversation with the best version of ourselves and being prepared in a good way, removing all of those sort of past issues or maybe bad experiences with that person, and just walking in there as pure as possible with our best intentions and our best preparation, we can have the best outcome. So remember, at the very least, 50% of this scenario relies with you. At least 50%. So if you're not walking into this conversation being the best you're not going to get the best outcome overall. So let's talk about them, though, right? How do we prepare to deal with them? Well, we want to identify their personality type if we can. Now, this is someone you work with on a regular basis. It's pretty easy to think about their traits and maybe come up with an idea of what you think. I gave you some of those little ideas, the bully, the narcissist, all those, right? You identify their personality type. And, if you just Google it, how do I deal with an overbearing person? How do I deal with someone who yells a lot? How do I deal with, there's some great articles there. There's some great advice. I mean, you can very quickly get some strategies in place if you can identify and think about, is this an overbearing person? Is this an extrovert? Is this an introvert? Is this a highly technical person? Is this someone who is very emotional? Whatever, however you might want to identify that, just to think about what your strategy might be. I would confirm that with your peers or confirm that with someone else, that's the way you're seeing this person is how they're seeing them, so that you can make sure that you have the right approach. And then try to see the world their way. Take a step back and say, if I was them in their position, in this situation, how would I react to whatever this conversation is going to be? How might I see the world through their eyes, right? And this often helps you come up with some different approaches and maybe a softer or sometimes firmer approach that will really help you be successful. Try to determine what you think they will want out of the conversation. If you do not clearly know what they want out of the situation, it's probably not a good idea to have that conversation yet. Will they want validation? Will they want a solution? Will they want to be appreciated or to be whatever it is, you need to figure that out. Because we often think about what we want out of the conversation, not what they want. And that's really, really important. Try to simplify everything, right? What is the issue you need to talk about? Simplify the location. Can it be a quiet, private location? Or maybe in certain situations you need to be in public. You need to be in a very space with a lot of people so that they're not going to take on some of their bad behaviors. But think about what's the best place for you to do that, and really focus on the right issue. And make sure you have a very good agenda prepared. In most situations, you have shared that agenda with them so they know what's going to be talked about. You're not springing something on them to really help. Make sure you take copious notes. We often get upset, we get emotional ourselves, we get angry, we get full of anxiety. Make sure we're taking good notes so that we can reflect and work for the next conversation. Because often difficult conversations don't just happen once. We continue to have them with that person over and over again. And then last but not least, make sure we are negotiating what happens next. So if you're going to have a tough conversation, you're going to work with someone who maybe is a little difficult, don't leave that room just going, oh, I'm so glad that's over, and not talk about what's going to happen next. Let's meet in a week and see how it's going. You promised you were going to do X, Y, and Z by this date. Really negotiate what happens next. This is so key to having better outcomes and being thankful that you went through whatever you had to do with that difficult conversation to be effective. So I'm seeing, looks like there's some good questions coming up. Great. We'll make sure we'll get to those as we move along. All right. So I promised you some strategies. So here are my 10 strategies to think about while you're having this difficult conversation. You've done your homework, you have your framework set up, you have your agenda, you're going to talk about what happens next. But while you're in that conversation, one of the best things you can do is start off by asking them, what is working? What is good? I have met with difficult clients who maybe were upset that something didn't happen or they had wanted a different outcome. And before we get to that, I'll always ask them, hey, I know we need to talk about this difficult thing, but can you, just so we understand, what's working right now? What's good about our relationship? What's good about the product that or the solution we're providing you? And getting them to talk about that and go, okay, so now let's talk about the issue. And we have this difficult conversation, but it creates a really good foundation to understand if 99% of it's working, we just need to fix this one thing. It's a lot different scenario than if they tell me everything's broken, they hate everything, we're the worst thing ever. Well, then maybe I don't want to work on this issue. Maybe we just need to break up, right? Maybe this isn't a good situation for both parties. All right. So you could really figure out and take their temperature on where they're at by asking what is working and what is good. The next one is if you're dealing with someone who is very upset, very overbearing, very dominant, a bit like a crying baby. Sometimes a baby just wants to cry and there isn't any reason for it. And you can't, no matter what you do, you change them, you give them a bottle, you shake the toy or the key. No matter what you do, sometimes they just want to cry, right? And we have those people in our lives that sometimes they just have to get it out. So my suggestion is to shut up and let them get it out and take copious notes while you're doing it. Really make them feel like you heard them. Let them just, kind of almost, exhale all of that stuff that they're dealing with and take good notes. Now, the key here is if you are dealing with someone like this, once they're done, is to ask them, is that everything? Have you expressed everything? Have I heard everything you wanted to talk about? And when they're done and they say yes to that, when you start talking, if they try to interrupt and they try to interject, you say, listen, when you were speaking, I made sure I listened to everything you said. I took good notes. Would it be okay if you let me finish and give me the same courtesy back? This strategy has worked so well with those difficult people who want to be loud and obnoxious and just dominate, is to keep reminding them, I listened to you, it's your turn to listen to me, right? And if they won't, then maybe you need to just get up and walk out until they're willing to do that. But sort of this reciprocation comes into play, right? They have, they will feel like they have to reciprocate back because you did sit there and listen and not interrupt. This is a really good strategy for some of those people. The next one is if you're really finding that the conversation just can't continue, if it's not working, if they're so upset and emotional or rude that you cannot move forward, just stop and reschedule. Let them cool off. If they cannot have a conversation that is worthwhile, and you just know that this is just not going to go anywhere, find an excuse, find any reason you can, and just say, even if you have to just say, I think that there's just too much, heat here. There's too much emotion. Let's just stop. Let's come back tomorrow morning at 8 and let's pick this conversation up with cooler heads and take some time to think about what's happened so far. This rescheduling strategy is really, really effective. And sometimes it's just enough to help you to have time to think about how to handle it going forward. Sometimes we need more time to process them. And with all the things they just threw at us, maybe we're not ready to continue the conversation. So there is no problem in just telling someone, I think we need to come back at a later date and talk about this because I don't know if you're really ready or I'm not ready. I really need to think about what you've had to say. The next strategy is to get help, or in some cases, to have a witness. Um, we have sometimes bad behaviors, or people who want to act a certain way when it's in a one-on-one situation. But if we can get them around other people, their behaviors will sort of get a little bit better, or they're a little bit less attacking, right? Or maybe somebody else in your company or in your group is a little bit better dealing with this person than you are. And so getting them to help you is great. If you feel like their behaviors are starting to cross a line, having that witness is really, really good as well. And I find that it keeps them from maybe going over the edge too much. So really think about, do you need to have that other person there? I am always a big advocate for groups. I think groups of 5 to 7 people to have a tough conversation with someone is better, because there's more people to listen, there's more people to have ideas, there's more people to empathize and sympathize and to have a real conversation. Whereas if you're in a one-on-one setting, you are on an island and trying to either deal with this person or to come up with ideas and resolutions to help them, right? I would rarely ever get on a call with a client that was upset with me, or someone in a business situation, and not bring help, not bring my team, not bring people who can help me help that person and help that situation get better, right? It's very rare that a one-on-one situation is going to be your best bet. So really think about help in those situations. Strategy number 5, be proactive, not reactive. So what do I mean by that? I really like to take a little piece of paper and write out what's the issue here that we're going to meet about, right? And then what is it that I want for this person? What is it in their best interest? What is it I want for them? So let's just say I have an employee that is, being rude in meetings to somebody, and I want to deal with this. So maybe what I want for them is to be able to exist on this team in a positive manner. What is it I want in terms of them, right? What I don't want is to say in my terms. I want that person to stop being a jerk to that other person. That's what I want. What I want is for them to be able to feel safe and to feel like they can have a great experience with their team. Sort of rephrasing it in their words, right? What are the problems that we're dealing with? And then what are some of the outcomes? So think about structuring and creating that environment, and then I often will write out a few questions or a few statements. This is a really difficult conversation. I might guess at some of the things I think they might ask or they might say. And I would think about what I want my responses to be. What is it I want to say that's going to be appropriate and going to help this become a better situation, than just trying to wing it and have this emotional response? Because we all know we deal with people that are good at pushing buttons. Maybe they have excuses or things, and if we're not ready, if we haven't thought through some of this, we might not have the right response ready. I know I like to think through things sometimes, and so if somebody brings up a bunch of new points, that can be difficult to kind of bring that conversation back to where we want it to be. So having some of those ideas written out, and I think they might say these things, right? They might ask these questions. And if they do, what would I say? Be careful. We're preparing for what could happen. We don't want to manifest what we think will happen for sure we don't want to drive it into that, but we definitely want to be prepared for the different types of things that could occur. The 6th strategy, and I reserve this one for the most difficult of people. And I certainly would not do this as a first resort. But if you have someone whose behavior is continuing to be a problem, and maybe you are forced to deal with this person. This is a coworker that you're going to have to work with them. Or maybe it's a client and you don't have the authority or ability to fire that client, and you're going to have to keep dealing with them, and they are difficult. They are rude. They are cutting and just, maybe their behaviors at times cross a line for you and make you uncomfortable. If you need to, tell them how their behavior makes you feel. I had someone in my life that for years, their behavior, I was, because of who they are, I'm stuck with them in my life forever, probably. And I wasn't going to cut them out, but at times their behaviors could be cross a line for me. And I remember learning the strategy, and I went back to them and I said, when you do this thing, you really make me feel like you don't care about me. You make me feel like my opinions don't matter. When you yell at me that way, it makes me feel like, and just insert however it makes you feel. And when I did that, this person got even more upset in that moment. But I'll tell you that since I did that, this person has never repeated the worst of those behaviors with me ever again. Just that me articulating and being brave enough to articulate how it made me feel, that behavior made me feel this way, they realized in their time to reflect that they didn't want me to feel unloved, unliked, unappreciated. So they had to stop with those bad behaviors, right? The things that they were doing, maybe they were doing because of the closeness of the relationship, that they had to stop doing that. So again, not a strategy you're going to throw out in the first bad conversation, but certainly, I have said this to difficult clients before, hey, when you talk to my staff that way, it makes me feel like you don't value our relationship. It makes me feel like you don't want to continue to be a client of ours, right? Or, if you're going to raise your voice at me that way, just figure out your own language and how you're going to do that. But if you can articulate that, it is a very effective way to get them to begin to think about changing their behavior. And just to reiterate what I have seen is it's very unlikely for them to make that change in that moment, but it's more likely for them to make the change the next time you talk. They're going to have time to think about that and reflect. Not the easiest strategy. I hope that you don't have anyone in your life you have to use that with, but if you do, it's a good one to think about. So looks like we have some great comments. Thank you everyone for continuing to throw in comments and questions. We will get to questions at the end, but I love them all. Please keep it up. The next strategy is called feed forward. And this is one of my favorites. And I want to give big thanks to Marshall Goldsmith, who taught me this. In fact, when he was on my radio show a few years ago, he introduced me to this idea. And when he talked about it, the light bulb went on. And I said, we got to start doing this. So what we have done is eliminated feedback. Feedback is negative. If I say to you, if we were all in a meeting and I notice that you keep interrupting certain people and I want to talk to you about that, and I come to you and I say, hey, in that last meeting, you just kept interrupting everybody. Well, it's negative. It feels confrontational, right? You're going to immediately feel defensive and have to give excuses or reasons why. Well, I felt like I had to, or no one was listening to me, or whatever it is. Instead, if we tell someone, hey, in the next meeting, can you make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak? Can you make sure that you are listening twice as much as you're speaking? Can you make sure that you're not interrupting anyone? Can you help me make sure that everyone gets to be, say whatever it is that they want to say before you jump in, right? I have never had anyone get upset with me when I phrase it that way. In fact, I even jokingly, just to see how far I could take this, I even went to someone and I said, hey, in the next meeting, could you stop being such a jerk? And they kind of laughed and went, yeah, I can do that. I was blown away. I was shocked. I could not believe they didn't get mad at that. But if I had just changed the wording and said, why are you such a jerk in the last meeting? Immediately, we're going to have a fight. We're going to have a confrontation. This is not going to go well, right? So wording is so important for us to be able to maneuver what we want from people and how we want it to happen. So just think about changing your wording just ever so slightly to what you want from them in the future. In the next time you talk to customer service, can you really make sure that you take a positive tone with them. Our people are here to help you. We don't want them to feel like they're being attacked. We want to resolve your issues. Whatever, however you need to direct their behaviors. Sometimes people just need those boundaries. They need that recognition and that sort of direction on what we want from them going forward. I have found this to be incredibly beneficial in dealing with teenagers. If anybody has any of those terrible little creatures that are teenagers out there, this one is fantastic. It really gets rid of some of that confrontation that is already naturally there with them, right? Between parents and teenagers, but just sort of changing that behavior. Hey, the next time you take out the car, can you make sure you clean up your mess, right? Instead of, why did you leave a mess in my car when you borrowed it, right? This is just a small shift in language. May not always work, but it's a pretty good one to take advantage of. The next strategy, and then we're going to get down to 10 strategies, and then we're going to get to your questions. I want to really hear about some of the things you're dealing with, and we can talk through and see if we can find some solutions for you as well. So strategy number 8 is to change the communication medium. So I have found that sometimes people, if without context or emojis, people read things with a negative tone. So they assume the negative if they're reading an email or reading a chat or Slack or Teams or whatever it is. If they don't understand the context, they will assume that it's negative, right? So if we're finding that we're having a problem, the communication's off with someone, if you've been sending it all in written form, switch to a phone call, get them on the line, right? Call them up, get them on a video call, whatever it is, right? Maybe send them a voice message. Maybe that's what you need to do. So they can hear your voice, they can hear the intent and the inflection of what you really mean. Again, that could be to soften it. That could be to make it more firmer. Maybe they really need to know that this is a boundary and they can't cross. Maybe they're not picking up on the seriousness of what you're trying to communicate. So, or maybe when you're talking to them and they're not getting it, maybe you just need to send it to them an email. Maybe you need to document or to put it in some other written form. Different people react to things in different ways, and sometimes they need to hear it, to see it, to read it in multiple channels to really get it. So if you find that someone is a challenge for you or you're not getting good outcomes from them, change the medium. It can make all the difference in the world. And it shouldn't be that way, right? We think, if I tell someone something, shouldn't matter if I talk to them or I call them or I send a voice chat or I email them or I text them. It shouldn't matter, but it does. And so if we want to be effective, if we want a better outcome, we've got to take on that responsibility ourselves and to go back and try something different if what we're doing isn't working and we're not getting that outcome that we want. This is really important. Strategy number 9. So I talked about this a little bit, but make sure you have prepared questions. Prepare. The bigger the negotiation, the bigger the conversation, the bigger the stakes, the more you should be preparing those questions, the more you should be really thinking about how to drive the outcome that you want, right? What are the things you can ask? What are the statements you can make? What are the agreements that you might need to get from this person to get to the place that's going to be good for them? That's most important. Good for them first. Good, and then good for you both, and good for the relationship. You have to think about and continue to phrase what you want through their eyes and through their world first. If you get on a call and what you are focusing only on what you want out of this and what is important to you, you're going to be far less effective. It can be a little effective if you have power and influence over that person, but you can be the most effective in all situations, and especially those where maybe you don't have that, where you are thinking about this in their world, in their terms, through their eyes, through their wants and desires, and preparing those questions and visualizing that outcome the best way you can. Now, are you going to do this for just a quick, small issue with someone? No, or maybe you might just think about 1 or 2 questions. but maybe you're having a really hard time with a client and this might be the end of this relationship. I mean, you really ought to come up with a lot of questions. Or maybe you're in a sales cycle and you're dealing with a really difficult negotiation. You really should have 10, 15, maybe even 20 questions and real goals and ideas thought through about before you get on that call with that person or that group of people. Don't just walk in and wing it, right? The best negotiators, the best facilitators of good outcomes have done the prep in advance. And I mean, a lot of times it doesn't really matter. Now, I will tell you, I didn't list this as a strategy, and I probably should add an 11. But one that I learned recently was to ask the other person when you get on the phone, what's the most important thing that we need to do in this conversation? What's the most important thing you want to make sure we talk about, or we do, or we figure out? It is amazing what they tell me. They might say, all I want to know is that you can do this, this, and this. If you guys can do that, we're done. We're set. I'm sorry for getting so angry. And you're like, oh, well, we can do that. Is that all we need to do? Okay, what's the next step? What's the outcome? What are we going to do? And it might all be over. You may not have had to go through all of that other stuff just to get to the point of whatever it is that they were hoping to get out of the conversation. So being prepared and then asking them to sort of align on that is a really good way to proceed. Now, this one is going to be maybe a little bit interesting, but when we talk to somebody, really matters. So let me tell you a little story. There's a wonderful book called Thinking Fast and Slow about Amos Tversky and Danny Kahneman's famous psychological economists. They did a lot around cognitive biases. I've learned so much from them. There's actually the guy who wrote Moneyball did another version of that book, his sort of story of that, called The Undoing Project. I think it's a much more accessible book. If you really want to get into the weeds, Thinking Fast and Slow might be the better book. But either book, they tell the same story, which is they went back and studied parole judges in Israel. And they tried to figure out what sort of things were going on, or what could they predict why judges might say yes to parole for some people and no for others. What was going on? What would cause them to say yes or no? And the shocking thing they figured out was that you were more likely to get a yes if the judge had just eaten. You were more likely to get a no if the judge was hungry. So the closer you got to lunch, the more likely you would get a no. In fact, like the case heard right before lunch almost always got a no. The case when they first started in the morning, or the case right after lunch, almost always got a yes. So people, if they're hungry, part of their brain is subconsciously thinking about when and how and where they're going to get their next meal. And so they're sort of lost their capacity, part of their capacity to think about whatever it is you want to talk to them about. This is why when we take a new possible client out for a meal, we often get the deal done and the contract signed. It's because they've been fed and they have the mental capacity now to really think about the deal that's in front of them. So don't schedule an important call, a difficult conversation right before lunch for them, right? They may be in a different time zone. Schedule it right after lunch, right? Or at a time when they're not going to be hungry. Maybe you need to, if it's really going to be a tough one, maybe you need to send them a donut and a coffee on, DoorDash or something. So they got some food in their mouth when you're going to have this difficult conversation. But if they're hungry, it will impact their mood and their ability to have a reasonable conversation. I'm sure we've all seen that, the funny Snickers commercials where, somebody's like they're Danny DeVito, there was somebody else being really grumpy and they say, hey, have a Snickers. That's actually comes from this research, that if you're hungry, you're going to be a little grouchy. You're going to be a little bit less likely to say yes and a little less likely to be open to having a real conversation. So really think about when you're going to do this. Now, if you're going to meet with them in person, it's also important to make sure that the temperature is appropriate. If it's too hot or too cold, the same thing will happen. Subconsciously, they are thinking about how they can get warmer or colder, and part of their brain power is being sucked away from the conversation because they are thinking about their body temperature and the uncomfortableness of being hot or cold. This comes from the same research as well. So thinking about how to do that, again, the name of the book, Thinking Fast and Slow, or the other one, which I think is a better one to start with, is The Undoing Project. All right, so now that we have the 10 strategies, before we get to questions, what are some of the other things that we need to think about? Sometimes you just need to fold your cards. Sometimes there isn't a solution, right? There isn't a good outcome, okay? So some people should just be removed, right? We have bad employees, we have bad clients, we have bad people in our lives. Sometimes nothing we do, no preparation, no strategy, right? No negotiations will change the fact that their behaviors are not appropriate, or they're demonstrating to us that they're not going to change. And if that is the case, we need to get rid of them. We need to remove them or remove ourselves from that situation. Okay? We do not have to put up with certain behaviors or things that are inappropriate to a point that it is causing us, right, to be in a bad situation. Now, hey, that doesn't mean we don't have to deal with anybody who's difficult. That's not what I'm saying. But we all know there is a line, and that person is continually going over that line, and these strategies are not working. Sometimes they just need to be removed, or we need to be removed from their lives. Remember that bullying in the workplace is not something I'm talking about. If someone is being a bully, or definable bullying, meaning they are targeting you specifically, right? They are doing things to you specifically that would be considered the definition of bullying. That needs to go to HR. If it's a client, that needs to go to your boss, right? Those types of behaviors are different. I'm talking about disagreements. I'm talking about people whose personality types maybe don't always align with ours, right? These types of behaviors are different, and they need to be handled differently. You don't need to put up with someone who's going to bully you, or someone that's going to do something that's going to cause you so much distress. That's not what I'm talking about here. So be very, very clear about those behaviors. Make sure that being someone who's targeting you, right, who's coming after you specifically, is not the same as just someone who's a difficult personality. Someone who's we see it; they're sort of difficult all the time. They're sort of doing this to everybody, right? We can go have that conversation and work with that person. That's different than them doing it to one specific person. I mean, I've seen people who targeted one specific person because of their gender, their sexual orientation, their race, their age, right? And that stuff was not appropriate. And we had to go and deal with that in a much different way than just the fact that they interrupt people a lot, or maybe they're an overshare, or they overtalk, or right, something that's less maybe difficult, but is not necessarily inappropriate. So remember, if it's inappropriate behavior, take that to HR. This is not where you throw in one of my strategies and hope that's going to work. I wish it would, but there is a clear distinction here between the two things. So cool. So we're going to get to questions now. I want to make sure, and what we're going to do here is I want to thank People G2 and AccuSource for bringing this great webinar today, bringing so many people. We have so many people online. I know there's going to be a lot of good questions, but want to thank them for bringing this webinar for free. Certainly, if you have any questions about background checks or drug testing and need help, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you, and you can reach out to us. But let's go ahead and get to some questions here. Let me pull up the chat. Let's see the questions. I think that Danielle has marked them for me. Thank you so much, Danielle. She's doing a great job of moderating today. What is the best way to approach these strategies when the power dynamic is that one person has real or perceived influence over you. So, and this comes from Molly. So Molly, it's a great question. I have a couple ideas. First, if you walk into that conversation, assuming that person likes you, assume that person wants to work with you, go in it with the best sort of manifested situation, right? That don't go in thinking the negative stuff. If you walk in with sort of that posturing that this person likes me, this person wants to work with me, and even though you might feel like there's some power dynamics there, it will allow you to sort of create better boundaries and exude a bit more confidence that will get them to kind of back up a little bit. Remember that no one actually has leverage over anybody. That is a misconception often in negotiations, that people think they have leverage, they have a one-up on somebody. It's just not true. So you always have the right to stop, to leave, to change that relationship. And if you're willing to explore that a little bit, that person suddenly loses that perceived power over you, right? Now, if our boss says, hey, I'm willing to have a conversation, but ultimately I'm your boss and I'm going to decide on what we're going to do moving forward, that's a part of the structure and the hierarchy, right? And that's a little bit different than maybe letting a client walk all over you, but well, I'm just going to take my business somewhere else. Well, sorry to hear that. If you feel like you can do that, that's fine. But understand, for us to have a good relationship, here's what we need to do, and here's how we need to work together, right? And not allow that person to play that card just because there's that perceived. Make sure that perceived power is not coming from your head, that story you're telling yourself, because often we tell ourselves that a bit more than they are. Great question. Hillary asked, what if you have expressed concerns, how you feel, and how their behavior impacts your business, and the issue persists? Do you address the behavior of a repeat offender? Yes. Continually say, so you have sort of a couple options, right? It may take multiple times for you saying that to them, that, hey, when you do this, it makes me feel this way. Remember, though, if someone continues to do that, you may have to ask for help, depending upon where you are in the organization or where you are in that relationship. But you may need to have a line that if they continue to cross that, something needs to change, right? Do you need to fire that client? Does that client need to go to a different account rep? Does somebody else need to handle that, right? If they continue those behaviors which are negative, something has to change. If they're not willing to change, something has to change on your end. Firing them, changing their rep, doing something different, right? And that often, sometimes it's just a personality thing, right? You can change who their account rep is, and that can be all the difference in the world. I've seen people that just seem to be respond better to women or respond better to men, and even though that's maybe should not be that way, just making that change sometimes is solve the problem, right? We were able to retain the client. So if they're not sort of doing that for you appropriately, continue, think about how to change that. The next question was from Hillary, regarding the rescheduling strategy, isn't there a possibility that would make the other person more upset? What would you do in that case? Absolutely, it could, right? But if you don't feel like you can have a good outcome in that situation, if you feel like things have gotten so emotionally charged, you have every right to say, I'm done in this moment. I'm happy to come back later today, tomorrow morning. You have every right to stop. So don't let them take that power from you, right? If you don't feel right about the conversation, if you feel like they've thrown in a bunch of new things that you're not prepared to talk about, you have every right to say, I really need a little bit of time to think about this. I really feel like this conversation's gotten derailed and we're now in kind of a bad spot. I need us to take a break, and we need to come back on the time. And they can get upset, but you have every right to control that part of it. You are 50% of that conversation, and to pull out and come back later. So that's on. You cannot control how they're going to react, but you can control your ability to manage that situation more appropriately. Great question. Elise asked, how to handle criers in conversations during constructive feedback. So that's an interesting one. I guess it depends on why they're crying. So if they're crying just because they're having a difficult time, anytime they get in that situation where it's difficult and they just kind of get emotional, maybe just slowing down, maybe just giving them a moment to get caught up. Sometimes it just needs to be ignored. Maybe that's just sort of something they can't control, but they're still willing to have the conversation. I think if they're crying because they feel attacked or they feel like it's not that they know that they've made a mistake and maybe they're a little upset, but maybe they feel like they're being attacked. Maybe you need to back up and kind of reset that. And of course, maybe you need to reschedule. So it does depend on why they're crying, I think, and figure that out. Or is the crying some part of a manipulation to make you feel like you can't continue to address the issue? I mean, you have to kind of weed through that a little bit and decide on what you think is best. Is it back up? Is it pause? Is it slow down? Is it ignore and just keep going because it's not sincere? You know, so you have to think about that. Looks like Leslie asked, are the strategies the same when someone continuously makes poor decisions? They don't necessarily have bad behavior, but they do dumb stuff over and over and refuse your help. So a little bit different, right? So the difficult conversation is, hey, dealing with the issue that they're having, right? That's a difficult conversation. So I do a whole other webinar on dealing with mistakes versus errors. So if they're making errors where they're continually messing up when they shouldn't be, they have the resources, they have the training, they have the knowledge, and they're making the mistake because they're not managing their time, because they're careless. Those are things that shouldn't be, accepted. They should not be tolerated. And so we need to remove those people or figure out a way to create an environment where they understand that's not okay. And if they're going to continue to do that, they're not going to be here anymore, right? We have to create those boundaries for those people. That's different than if they make a mistake because they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the knowledge. Then we want to help them learn in those situations, right? Is it a learning opportunity, or is this they're just, to your point, being a dumb person, right? That kind of stuff we don't need to tolerate. When is it a good idea? This question comes from Andrew. These are fantastic questions, everyone. Thank you so much. Keep them coming. We got some more time here so we can keep going. When is it a good time to have someone else in the room when using these strategies? So if you have been ineffective in the past in dealing with this person, great time to have some help. If you know someone else has always been pretty good with this person, great time to bring them in. If you know this personality type is a particular trigger for you, maybe someone who yells a lot, is that you really have a hard time with that kind of person, great time to bring somebody in, right? If you think this person is borderline crossing boundaries and maybe it's bullying behavior or they're likely to target you, great time to bring somebody in. If you notice that this person has less bad behaviors in group settings, right? Great time to bring somebody in. So is there any value to bringing somebody in? And will the other person or people that you bring in have good ideas and support and ideas? Great time to bring somebody in. Now, the only thing you need to be careful of is sometimes having a difficult conversation is about letting that person feel safe to have a conversation. So we don't want to make them feel unsafe by inviting somebody in who they're going to feel threatened by, right? If you're going to have maybe the first time you talk to somebody, bringing in HR that's an overkill, right? But if you keep talking to this person and they're not getting it, it's not doing, maybe need to bring in a manager, HR, someone like that to help you. Maybe it's just their friend. You know that they get along really well with somebody, and you ask that friend, hey, I know you're friends with Tom, and I'm having a hard time with Tom right now. Can you maybe help me? I feel like I'm connecting with him. Maybe I know you guys are close. Maybe you can help me bridge that gap because I really want him to be effective and do well here, and I want to have a better relationship. Can you help me? Right? Great time to bring somebody in. What if the conversation is a termination? I can assume that you want it, that they want it not to be let go, but they can't fire them just because you want them to. So I think if the conversation is you're terminating them, and this is not there's no debate, there's no way that you're going to not terminate them, there's no reason to even have that conversation. I mentioned Moneyball earlier, and I think it's just on my mind. But if you saw that movie, you might remember the scene with Jonah Hill where Brad Pitt teaches Jonah Hill how to tell the baseball player who's been traded. He says, you walk in, you tell them, hey, you've been traded, go talk to so-and-so. They're going to, they've got all the paperwork. They're going to help you get re-signed. We really appreciate you being here. Good luck. I mean, it's like cut and dry. So if you're going to terminate somebody, I think that you just need to go say, hey, we've decided this is not going to work. We've prepared your final paycheck. We really appreciate whatever those things are you're going to do to help them be successful in that transition, and talk about that, and not even get into all the reasons why, right? If it's already done, there's absolutely no reason to have an argument with them. I mean, just to say, listen, we've already made the decision, you're terminated. I understand that you're upset. I understand that you have your own opinion about it, but it's not going to change the outcome. There's no reason for us to have an argument. You are terminated, right? And move. What does the future look like? How are we going to help you? What is that, references or job transition or severance or whatever those things are, to talk about those things and make it short and sweet. I think the longer, more sort of drawn out that is, the worse it's going to be. What about documentation? So Andrew asked about documentation. I assume that any difficult conversation requires clear documentation afterwards. Do you agree? And how should that be archived? So it does depend. I like taking good notes, and I like preparing and having that as part of documentation. If this is not an HR issue, quote unquote, right? That's just for my own edification and my own sort of being able to keep track of things. So I don't think that necessarily needs a formal thing. Now, if I was dealing with a difficult client, I would definitely put a summary of what the issue was and what happened and what the outcomes were and who attended inside of the CRM, right? So we could keep track of that, and then we could certainly see that. If this is an employee and this is kind of like an issue where you want to document that process, I think you definitely want to maybe send back a summary to them and copy someone in HR, or maybe you want to create a summary and have that put in their file based on whatever is appropriate for your company. But there's a difference between having a conversation just because, hey, something happened and we know we want to change behaviors and we want a better outcome next time, then I feel like this is something that needs to be documented because this is a performance-related thing for their job, right? So be careful about which situation that really is. Sometimes we want to have a conversation with someone and they feel like this is going to be documented. They're not going to be willing to open up and really talk to you in a way that's going to help you resolve that issue forever, right? But if clearly somebody keeps, I've seen in companies I've consulted with where one particular guy consistently interrupted and talked down to every woman that was in the meetings he was in, right? That kind of issue we had to talk about, but we had to document, and we knew if the behaviors didn't change, it was going to be a part of a longer process that could lead to termination. So think about what it is that, if the behaviors don't change, will I need that documentation? Is that something appropriate, or is this something a little bit different? If you're having a difficult conversation with your boss, I don't know if documentation matters or not. If you can't get that changed, you may just leave. You may go find another job, right? So these have all been wonderful, wonderful questions. We have 3 minutes left. This is your last call. If you have a question, really appreciate so many of you have stuck around and been willing to listen and share. This is certainly a topic that I love talking about. We've done as a keynote many, many times. So I guess Danielle will bring you back up to do the final business here.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you for facilitating this informative webinar. And a special thank you to our attendees for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact us at marketing@accusource-online.com. On behalf of People G2 and the AccuSource team, we wish you all an enjoyable day.